Welcome back to QHSE Talks. I was reading a case study recently about a mid-sized manufacturing firm, and the story was just incredibly unsettling.
Oh, yeah. Unsettling how?
Well, on paper, this company was the absolute gold standard. I mean, they had the flashy safety banners in the warehouse, a fully staffed safety committee, all of it.
Right, the whole performative package.
Exactly. And they had a CEO who constantly talked about, building a zero-harm culture. But then within 18 months of what seemed like a fairly manageable accident on their production line, the company filed for bankruptcy.
Wow, just 18 months.
Yeah, completely went under. And the board was totally blindsided. They kept pointing to their safety dashboard, which was, glowing green. And they were asking, how did a company with such a great safety record go financially bankrupt from a safety failure?
It is a terrifying scenario, but frankly, it's not an uncommon one at all.
Really? It happens that often.
Oh, absolutely. When a company experiences a catastrophic financial failure that stems from a workplace incident, it usually reveals a fundamental misdiagnosis of their own system.
Meaning they were looking at the wrong numbers.
Exactly. They were looking at the wrong metrics, or worse, they were looking at the right metrics, but failing entirely to translate them into the language of business survival.
And if you are listening to us right now, you are likely the exact person tasked with preventing that misdiagnosis. You are a dedicated safety professional.
Right, the person actually on the ground trying to make sense of the data.
Exactly. You might be, burning the midnight oil right now, studying for the ASP, the Associate Safety Professional exam. Or maybe you're a seasoned practitioner stepping into a new role.
And if you are, you're probably looking to sharpen your ability to not just manage safety, but to prove your program's undeniable financial worth to a highly skeptical C-suite.
Which is really the true hurdle, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because recognizing a hazard is just one skill.
Yeah, it's the baseline. But proving the financial value of mitigating that hazard before it bankrupts the firm, that requires a completely different diagnostic toolkit.
And that is the central mystery we are solving on this edition of QHSE Talks. We are exploring the mathematical and financial realities of safety.
So we're getting into the heavy numbers today.
We are. For those following along in their study guides, we are digging deep into the concepts surrounding ASP 11 Domain 1 Topic 8. So that's calculating lagging indicators.
Right, things like incidence rates, lost time, and the direct and indirect costs of incidents.
Exactly. But we're going to approach this a bit differently today. We aren't just going to sit here and read dry formulas aloud like a robotic textbook.
Nobody wants to listen to that.
No, definitely not. We are going to treat those formulas as tools to solve that mystery. We talked about why companies with seemingly great safety records still fail.
And the underlying necessity here is that major health and safety management systems, whether you operate under ISO 14000, ISO 4501, or ANSI Z10.
Right, the big frameworks.
Yeah, those big frameworks, they're all built on a foundation of continuous improvement. And the harsh truth is, you simply cannot improve who you cannot measure.
It's impossible. You're just guessing without the data.
Exactly. Benchmarks, KPIs, and metrics are basically the nervous system of those frameworks. To actually manage safety, you have to translate abstract concepts of risk into concrete, universally understood data.
But before we can translate that data for, say, the chief financial officer, we need to make sure we're actually collecting the right data to begin with.
Right, which is where a lot of programs stumble right out of the gate.
Yeah, because in the safety world, we constantly hear these two terms thrown around, right? Leading indicators and lagging indicators. I want to start with lagging indicators since they're really the bedrock of the regulatory requirements.
They absolutely are.
So if we're diagnosing the health of a company, what exactly is a lagging indicator? How do you define it?
Well, simply put, a lagging indicator is an outcome-based metric. It measures a definitive event after it has already occurred.
So it's looking backward.
Yes, it's a snapshot of historical performance. If you look at your OSHA safety log, lagging indicators are the cold, hard facts.
Like what specifically?
Like the total number of injuries your workforce suffered last year, or the sheer amount of lost work time those injuries resulted in.
Okay, that makes sense.
It also includes things like the number of OSHA citations you received during an inspection or the exact dollar amount paid out in workers' compensation claims.
Okay, so if lagging indicators are the historical record of our failures, basically, then what are leading indicators?
Leading indicators are your early warning system. They are the metrics that track the proactive, preventive steps an organization takes before an incident ever occurs.
Oh, I see. So it's the stuff you do to stop the lagging indicators from happening.
Exactly. They're designed to identify behavioral or systemic trends early on so you can intervene.
Give me an example of that.
Sure. So instead of counting how many workers fell off a scaffold last month, which is your lagging indicator, your leading indicator would track the number of daily scaffolding inspections completed.
Right, or like the number of employees who successfully passed fall protection training.
Yes, exactly. Or the frequency of near-miss reports submitted by the crew. It's proactive versus reactive.
You know, I usually visualize this with the driving metaphor. Imagine you're driving a really heavy truck down a dark, winding mountain road.
Okay, I like where this is going.
So lagging indicators are your rearview mirror. They tell you exactly where you've been, and they will absolutely confirm if you just clipped a guardrail or ran over a massive pothole.
Right. The damage is already done, but you can see it.
Yeah. But leading indicators are your headlights. They sweep the road ahead, illuminating the sharp curves, the ice patches, and the oncoming traffic so you can actually turn the steering wheel and avoid the crash entirely.
That is a highly accurate framing. The headlights show you the potential hazard, and the rearview mirror confirms the consequence if you fail to navigate it.
But, you know, I have to push back on this a little bit, especially given how much focus regulatory bodies and the ASP exam place on the rearview mirror.
Oh, I know where you're going with this. It's a common frustration.
Right. Because if I'm already crashed into the ditch, staring into the rearview mirror doesn't help me uncrash the truck.
No, it certainly doesn't.
So lagging indicators just feel like a depressing retroactive autopsy. Why do we spend so much time and energy calculating our historical failures when all our effort should be poured into the headlights?
Like I said, it's a frustration that almost every safety professional wrestles with at some point. Why obsess over the past?
Exactly. Why not just focus on the prevention?
Because if you step back and look at the organization as a complex ecosystem, the necessity of lagging indicators becomes incredibly obvious.
How so?
Yes, they are reactive, but they are the ultimate, uncompromising baseline of reality. You simply cannot know if your headlights are actually working unless you track the bumps in the rearview mirror.
Okay, give me an example of how that plays out in the real world.
Let's say you implement a massive new safety initiative. You're tracking a fantastic leading indicator, like you mandate that supervisors conduct 1,000 safety observations per month across your manufacturing facilities.
Okay, an aggressive leading indicator.
Very aggressive. And let's say you hit that metric perfectly every single month. Your leading indicator dashboard is glowing green.
So the headlights are on high beam, everything looks great.
Exactly. But then at the end of the year, you look at your lagging indicators and your actual entry rate has climbed by 15%. What does that tell you?
Well, it tells me my 1,000 safety observations are completely useless. I mean, people are just doing the paperwork, checking the boxes, and then going right back to getting hurt.
Precisely. The lagging indicator grounds you in reality. It prevents the organization from developing a false sense of security based on performative actions.
Wow, okay. So it's the reality check against the theory of the leading indicators.
Yes. Lagging indicators are the definitive measure of the overall effectiveness of your loss control programs over time. You can't argue with them.
And I imagine from a compliance standpoint, you really don't have a choice anyway.
That's the other half of it. From a purely operational standpoint, regulatory bodies like OSHA or MSHA in the United States strictly mandate the tracking of these lagging metrics. They are the universal language of compliance.
But it goes deeper than just keeping the regulators happy, right?
Yeah.
Because when looking through the Safety Professional Handbook, there's a heavy emphasis on the scientific relationship between these two sets of indicators.
Yes, the handbook is very clear about that relationship.
We talk about building an input-output model. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so the input-output model is crucial for anyone looking to build a sustainable safety culture. And honestly, it's a core concept you have to grasp for the exam.
Okay, so listener, take note here.
Right. The handbook basically argues that it is statistically reckless to measure leading indicators in a vacuum. But it is equally reckless to allocate your annual budget based purely on lagging indicators.
So you can't just look at one or the other.
No. A true loss prevention system requires you to define a mathematical causal relationship between the two. You have to build a model around performance influencing factors.
So if I'm understanding this, my inputs are the leading indicators. The hazard corrections, the specialized training hours, the preventive maintenance schedules.
Yes, those are the inputs you control.
And my outputs are the lagging indicators, the incidence rates, the lost days, the equipment damage.
Correct. The ultimate goal of the safety professional is to prove causality.
Like proving A causes B.
Exactly. If you increase the input of, say, targeted confined space training by 20%, does the output of confined space near misses and actual incidents decrease by a proportional amount over the subsequent 6 months?
Right. If you can't show that connection, you don't really know if your program is doing anything.
If you cannot build that mathematical correlation, you are literally just guessing. You're throwing money at training programs and hoping for the best.
But to build that input-output model, to even begin proving to the CEO that your training is working, you first need to be able to calculate those universal lagging outputs.
Yes, you have to have the hard numbers.
You have to be fluent in the specific mathematical language that OSHA and the ASP exam demands, which means I think it's time we dive into the actual math.
We do. And to understand the OSHA metrics, you have to understand the foundational constant that drives all of their calculations.
Ah, yes. The magic number. 200,000.
The famous 200,000.
When I first encountered this number in my studies, it felt incredibly arbitrary. Like someone at the Department of Labor just threw a dart at a board of large numbers.
A lot of people think that at first.
Yeah, but it's actually the bedrock of all record-keeping calculations in the U.S. Let's break down where 200,000 actually comes from.
It is definitely not arbitrary. The 200,000 figure represents a standardized baseline of working hours. Specifically, it is the mathematical equivalent of exactly 100 full-time employees working 40 hours a week for 50 weeks a year.
Wait, hold on. 50 weeks. There are 52 weeks in a calendar year. Why are we shorting them 2 entire weeks?
Good catch. The formula accounts for an average of 2 weeks of standard vacation, sick leave, or holidays per employee.
Oh, okay. So it's factoring in PTO.
Exactly. It's designed to reflect actual, realistic productive time.
Yeah.
So 100 employees times 40 hours times 50 weeks gives you 200,000 hours.
So this number essentially represents one standard 100-person company working for 1 full year.
Yes, that is the perfect way to think about it.
I totally see why that standardization is necessary now. Because if I'm the safety director for a massive automotive manufacturer, right, say we have 10,000 employees.
Okay, a huge operation.
Huge. Yeah. And we have 50 recordable injuries in a year. The raw number is 50. Now imagine a tiny local machine shop with only 40 employees.
Right.
If they also have 50 recordable injuries in a year, their raw number is also 50. So if you just look at the raw outcome on a spreadsheet, the giant auto plant and the tiny machine shop look identical.
They look exactly the same if you don't scale it.
But the reality is that the machine shop is an absolute slaughterhouse where every single employee is getting injured more than once a year.
Right, it's a complete disaster.
While the auto plant, with 10,000 people, is actually running a highly controlled, relatively safe operation to only have 50 injuries.
Exactly. Raw numbers are utterly useless for comparison across different scales. By using the 200,000 multiplier, you instantly level the playing field.
Because it turns it into a rate.
Right. It turns those raw injury counts into a standardized rate per 100 employees. It answers a very specific hypothetical question.
Which is?
It asks, regardless of how big or small our company actually is, if we hypothetically had exactly 100 employees, how many injuries would we have experienced this year?
That's brilliant. It scales everything up or down to that 100-person room.
Yes. This allows that massive auto manufacturer to directly compare its safety performance against the tiny machine shop, or even against the national industry average, with perfect mathematical fairness.
Okay, let's look at how that 200,000 constant actually slots into the formulas, because there are 3 primary incidence rates that every safety professional needs to calculate effortlessly for the exam.
You have to know these cold.
Formula number 1 is the TCIR, the total case incident rate. Or sometimes you'll see it referred to as the TRCR, the total recordable case rate. Same thing, right?
Same exact thing, just different acronyms depending on who you're talking to. The structure of the TCIR formula is the foundation for all the others we're going to discuss.
Okay, so walk me through it.
The numerator is the total number of recordable injuries and illnesses. You take that number and you multiply it by our constant, 200,000.
Got it. Injuries times 200,000.
Then you divide that entire product by the total hours actually worked by all employees during that specific time period.
So total injuries multiplied by 200,000 divided by total hours worked. Very straightforward.
Yes. Now, Formula 2 is the DART rate.
D-A-R-T. DART is an acronym for days away, restricted, or transfer.
Exactly. This metric filters out the minor scrapes. It focuses only on incidents severe enough that the employee either had to stay home, was placed on restricted light duty, or had to be transferred to a completely different job function because of their injury.
So this is measuring the more significant hits to the workforce?
Yes, but the mathematical structure is identical to the TCIR.
Okay, so what changes?
The only variable that changes is what you plug into the numerator. Instead of counting every single recordable injury, you only count the specific number of DART cases.
So you take the DART cases, multiply by 200,000, and divide by the total hours worked.
You got it. Same exact math, just a different category of injuries in the numerator.
Okay, then we have Formula 3, the severity rate, which is often referred to in older texts as the LWDII, right? The lost workday injury and illness rate.
Yes, LWDII is the older term, but you'll still see it, so know both. And again, same structure. Number of lost workdays multiplied by 200,000 divided by total hours worked.
But hang on, let's look really closely at the difference between DART and severity, because I think this trips a lot of people up when they're testing.
It is the most common place people make a mistake on the math portion.
Because in the DART formula, the numerator is the number of cases. But in the severity formula, the numerator is the number of days.
That is a critical distinction to grasp. It's vital. The DART rate counts the bodies. The severity rate counts the duration of the suffering.
Wow, okay. Count the bodies versus count the duration. Break that down with an example.
Let's say a worker trips on a loose cable, falls, and severely fractures their femur. That requires surgery and extensive rehab. They are out of work for 90 days.
That sounds awful.
It's a massive ordeal. But for the DART rate calculation, that entire 90-day absence counts as exactly one case. It is a single tally mark in the numerator.
Because it only happened to one person.
Right. But for the severity rate calculation, that same incident contributes 90 lost workdays to the numerator.
That makes total sense now. So DART measures the frequency of significant events, but severity measures the actual depth of the impact.
Precisely. You're measuring how bad it really was.
Let's make this concrete. Let's do a couple of calculations to see how this plays out in a realistic scenario for the listener.
Good idea. Let's run the numbers.
Okay, imagine a mid-sized logistics company. Over the past calendar year, their HR department confirms they had 90 total recordable cases.
Okay, 90 cases.
And their payroll system shows that the total hours worked by all employees combined was a very messy 1,623,451 hours.
That's a very realistic, ugly number.
Right. It's never a clean million in the real world.
Okay.
So we need to find their TCIR. I'll talk through the math. Our formula is cases times 200,000 divided by hours.
Go for it.
First, the numerator. 90 cases multiplied by 200,000 gives us 18,000 bills.
Yeah.
Then we take that 18,000 and divide it by our real-world hours. 1,623,451. When you run that division, you get 11.087, which we will just round to 11.1.
Perfect math. And how do you translate that 11.1 for the boardroom? What does it actually mean?
I would tell the executive team that for every 100 full-time employees working on our warehouse floor, 11.1 of them suffered a recordable injury this year.
Which, depending on the specific industry, is likely a terrible rate.
Yeah, over 10% of the standardized workforce is getting hurt. That's huge.
Now let's pivot and run a severity rate scenario, because this reveals a completely different angle of a company's health.
Okay, lay it on me.
Let's look at a specialized chemical plant. They have a very strong safety culture when it comes to minor things.
Yeah.
Nobody is tripping over boxes. Nobody's getting paper cuts.
So their TCIR is probably low.
Very low. Their total case count is minimal.
Yeah.
But when things go wrong with heavy chemicals, they go disastrously wrong.
Right.
So in a given year, they only had a few injuries. But those injuries resulted in an accumulation of 50 lost workdays. Their total hours worked across the plant for the year was exactly 2 million hours.
Okay, the severity formula is lost workdays times 200,000 divided by total hours. Let me run this. We take the 50 lost days, multiply by 200,000, which gives us 10 million new. We divide that 10 million by their 2 million actual hours worked. And the result is a clean 5.0.
A severity rate of 5.0. Meaning for every 100 full-time employees, your company experienced 5 completely lost workdays.
I can see why translating the raw data into that per 100 employees narrative is so powerful. It takes these giant abstract numbers in the millions and brings them down to a human scale that a manager can actually visualize.
It makes it tangible.
They can literally imagine a room of 100 people and picture 5 empty chairs because of injuries.
Exactly. It's undeniable when you frame it like that.
But if I'm analyzing a company, which of these rates is actually the most important? Is TCIR the ultimate benchmark everyone cares about?
That is a subject of heavy debate among professionals, but there's a crucial nuance you must understand, both for managing real risk and for navigating the ASP exam questions.
Okay, what's the nuance?
While the TCIR definitely gets the lion's share of attention in corporate sustainability reports, mostly because it's an easy number to slap on a brochure. The incidence rate for lost workday cases, the severity rate, is widely considered by risk managers to be the most meaningful performance indicator for a safety program.
Really? Why is that? Why would severity trump frequency? Because if a company has a TCIR of 15, they're hurting people constantly. Shouldn't that frequency be the primary focus?
Because frequency without context can be highly misleading.
How so?
Well, a high TCIR might just indicate that you have a diligent reporting culture, where every minor paper cut, every slight muscle strain that requires a single dose of prescription ibuprofen is meticulously recorded by HR.
I see. So they're just really honest.
Right. It shows you have a lot of minor failures, which is an operational issue, sure. But a high severity rate indicates a failure of catastrophic controls.
It means the big safety nets are breaking.
Exactly. It means your employees are suffering life-altering injuries that pull them out of the workforce for months at a time. It measures the true operational damage.
So it's about the depth of the failure.
Consider 2 competing roofing companies. Company A has a TCIR of 12, lots of minor cuts from shingles, maybe a few twisted ankles on the ladder.
High frequency, low severity.
Right. Now, Company B has a remarkably low TCIR of 1.5.
Yeah.
On paper, if you only look at TCIR, Company B looks infinitely safer.
They look like safety champions.
But if you look deeper and realize that Company B's 1.5 rate represents 3 workers falling off a 4-story roof and suffering permanent paralysis.
Oh, wow.
Their severity rate will be astronomical. The severity rate tells the true, unvarnished story of the human and financial cost. It forces you to focus on the controls that prevent fatalities, not just the controls that prevent splinters.
That distinction is vital. It forces you to prioritize your resources where they actually save lives.
Exactly.
Okay, so we have these very clean, standardized formulas. The 200,000 constant makes everything mathematically fair, and OSHA enforces strict, unbending definitions of what constitutes a recordable case or a restricted day.
It's a highly controlled ecosystem here in the United States.
Right. But businesses don't operate in a vacuum anymore. We live in an era of massive multinational corporations.
The global landscape changes everything.
It really does, because you might be the global safety director for a firm headquartered in Chicago, but you oversee manufacturing plants in Ohio, Lyon, France, and Kyoto, Japan. Suddenly, this clean OSHA math collides with geopolitical reality.
And that collision creates a massive data dilemma. It is a major focus in the Safety Professional Handbook, and you need to be prepared for it.
Let's explore this, because this blew my mind when I realized the implications. If I'm that safety director sitting in Chicago, I have a global dashboard on my computer screen, right?
Right, pulling data from all over the world.
And I'm looking at the lost time case rates, the LTCR for all my facilities worldwide. Am I actually looking at apples-to-apples data? Like, do the European and Japanese plant managers use the same 200,000 constant? Do they even define an injury the same way OSHA does?
If you haven't explicitly mandated a corporate standard, the answer is no. Absolutely not.
So my dashboard is just wrong.
If you are relying on their local regulatory data to feed your global dashboard, your data is actively lying to you.
That is terrifying.
Let's break down how a lost time case is actually defined across different jurisdictions, just to show you how bad it gets.
Okay, yeah, let's look at the U.S. first.
In the United States, OSHA's definitions are notoriously strict and highly conservative. If a worker is injured on a Tuesday and the evaluating physician says they cannot return to work on Wednesday, the very next calendar day, that must be recorded as a lost time case.
One single day away from work and it hits the permanent record. That is highly sensitive.
Extremely sensitive. Now, contrast that with the European Union. In many EU member states, a lost time case is generally only reported to the national regulatory agency after a worker has been away for 3 consecutive days.
Wait, really? 3 days?
3 days.
So if a worker in the French facility suffers a concussion, misses Thursday and Friday to recover, and is back on the line on Monday, that incident never even registers on the official EU lost time statistics.
It might be tracked internally by their local HR for payroll purposes, obviously, but it does not trigger a regulatory lost time report. The threshold is just inherently higher.
That's a massive discrepancy.
And if you think that creates a discrepancy, look at Japan. Under their regulatory framework, a lost time case is traditionally reported to the agency only after the worker has been away for 7 days.
7 days, an entire week.
Yes, a full week.
A worker in Kyoto could severely burn their hand, require significant medical treatment, be out of work for 6 entire days, return on day 7, and the Japanese facility officially reports 0 lost time cases to the government.
That is the reality of their regulatory environment. The threshold for what constitutes a reportable societal burden is vastly different from country to country.
This is a huge trap for a global safety manager. I mean, if I'm sitting in Chicago looking at a raw data spreadsheet, I see the Ohio plant has 25 lost time cases and the Kyoto plant has 2.
And what's your reaction as a manager?
My immediate reaction is going to be the team in Ohio is failing completely and the team in Kyoto is running a masterclass in safety. I need to give the Kyoto manager a bonus and fire the Ohio manager.
Exactly. But that conclusion might be a complete illusion.
Because the Japanese facility's rate looks artificially stellar, not because they are inherently safer, but simply because their regulatory net is woven so loosely that a massive amount of injuries slip right through.
Precisely. If you are a U.S.-based safety professional looking at international data, you must understand that U.S. facilities will typically display significantly higher lost time case rates compared to their international counterparts purely due to OSHA's highly conservative one-day-away definitions.
It's basically a statistical mirage.
If you try to compare the raw regulatory data from different sovereign nations, you are comparing apples to oranges, or perhaps, apples to bicycles. It is a meaningless statistical exercise.
But, I hear what you're saying about the math normalizing things within the U.S., but doesn't a flat multiplier like 200,000 artificially penalize a tiny 10-person company if one guy twists his ankle?
Yes. That is a common critique of the incidence rate system. And it's true to an extent. Yes, in a 10-person company, a single injury will skyrocket their rate to 10.0, making them look terrible on paper compared to a large firm. Small numbers create high volatility.
Right, because one incident has such a heavy statistical weight.
That is exactly why risk managers and insurance underwriters don't look at a single year's incidence rate in isolation for small companies. They look at 3 to 5 year rolling averages to smooth out those statistical spikes.
Okay, that makes it fairer over time.
Right, but the formula itself remains the most objective way to scale the data mathematically.
Okay, so back to our global safety director in Chicago. What is the actionable solution here? Because you can't exactly march into the Japanese Ministry of Health, Labor, and Welfare and demand they change their national reporting laws to match OSHA.
No, you definitely can't do that.
So how do you fix a completely broken global dashboard?
You cannot change national law, but you have absolute authority over corporate policy. To solve this data dilemma, organizations must develop and ruthlessly enforce strict corporate reporting requirements that normalize the data across all borders.
Meaning you just make your own rules for the company.
Exactly. You have to decouple your internal metrics from local regulatory definitions.
What does that normalization actually look like in practice? Walk me through the implementation. If I'm that director, what memo am I sending out?
It begins with issuing a binding corporate standard that dictates uniform terminology worldwide. The global safety director must set a single, non-negotiable time frame for lost time cases.
So pick a number and stick to it.
Right. For instance, corporate policy dictates, regardless of local governmental law, for our internal metrics, a lost time case is defined as any time a worker is away from work following an injury for 1 full day.
So you force the U.S. standard on everyone.
Yes. You force the managers in Lyon and Kyoto to report those 1-day and 2-day absences up the chain to Chicago using the U.S. standard, even though they will never report those specific incidents to their local governments.
Wow. You basically force them to maintain 2 sets of books, one for the local government compliance and one for corporate reality.
Exactly. You normalize the definition of an injury first. Then you standardize the mathematical calculation method globally.
Using the 200,000 constant everywhere.
You mandate that every single facility on Earth uses the exact same constant. You can use the OSHA 200,000 man-hours base, or you can use a 1 Velen man-hours base, which is actually much more common internationally and represents 500 employees.
Oh, I didn't realize there was a million-hour standard, too.
Yes. And honestly, from a mathematical standpoint, it does not matter which base constant you select, as long as every facility from Ohio to Kyoto is forced to use the exact same one. You must artificially create your own standardized ecosystem of data.
That is fascinating. It really highlights how much of safety management is actually just pure data governance.
It's all about controlling the variables.
Okay, so we have established how to accurately calculate the frequency and severity of our lagging indicators. We know how to normalize that data globally so we aren't being lied to by international spreadsheets.
We've got the math down.
Now, we have to bridge the gap between the safety department and the C-suite. We have to look at the financial devastation these lagging indicators leave behind. We need to talk about the true cost of accidents.
This is the critical pivot for any safety professional. This is where safety moves out of the realm of human resources and regulatory compliance and steps directly into the arena of corporate finance.
Which is where the real power is.
Absolutely. To speak to a CFO, you have to dissect the financial impact of an incident by categorizing the costs into two distinct buckets: direct costs and indirect costs.
Now, I've heard people talk about this using an iceberg metaphor. The direct costs are the tip of the iceberg visible above the water, and the indirect costs are the massive block of ice hidden below.
Right. The iceberg is the classic visual taught in almost every entry-level safety class. But frankly, I think it is fundamentally flawed when dealing with advanced financial analysis.
Really? Flawed how? It seems to make sense visually.
Because an iceberg is static. It just sits there. The hidden costs of an industrial accident are highly dynamic. They spread, they cascade through an organization over time.
So if it's not a static block of ice, what is a better way to conceptualize it?
I prefer to think of an incident as an earthquake.
An earthquake. Okay, I'm listening.
The direct cost is the actual crack in the ground right where the fault line slipped. It is highly visible, highly localized, and very easy to measure. But the indirect costs are the seismic waves and the resulting tsunami.
Ah, the ripple effect?
Yes. They travel outward invisibly at first, knocking over the supply chain miles away, rattling employee morale across different departments, and eventually crashing into the public relations and sales departments weeks or months later.
I really like that. The direct costs are the immediate crack in the foundation. Let's define those direct costs first.
Let's do it.
So these are the expenses directly linked to the incident with a high degree of accounting accuracy, right? You can point to a specific invoice.
Exactly. It's the paper trail.
This includes the immediate medical expenses, the financial compensation paid out to the injured employee for lost wages, the capital replacement cost if a piece of machinery was destroyed.
And don't forget the fines.
Right. The regulatory fines handed down by OSHA and the legal fees associated with defending against those fines. Generally, a significant portion of these direct costs are what your workers' compensation or property insurance is actually designed to cover.
Exactly. It is the visible damage. But as you noted, the crack in the foundation rarely destroys the entire city. It is the seismic waves that cause the catastrophic financial collapse.
Those are the indirect or hidden costs.
Yes, these are real, severe expenses incurred by the company, but they are intangible. They do not come with a neat little invoice from a vendor, making them notoriously difficult to calculate in the short term.
What kind of costs are we talking about here?
The Safety and Health for Engineers text by Roger Brower lists a terrifying array of these hidden costs that most operations managers completely fail to account for.
Let's trace those seismic waves then. Walk me through a detailed scenario. Let's make the invisible costs visible for the listener.
Okay, let's build a timeline.
Imagine a mid-sized distribution center. It's 2:00 p.m. on a Tuesday. A forklift operator misjudges a turn, collides with a structural racking system, and the entire rack collapses, severely crushing the operator's leg and destroying the inventory on the rack.
A terrible but very realistic scenario.
The direct cost is obvious. The ambulance ride, the emergency surgery, the workers' comp claim, and the cost of the destroyed forklift. But what do the indirect seismic waves look like, hour by hour?
Hour one is pure chaos and pure financial drain. The moment that rack collapses, production stops.
Right, everything grinds to a halt.
The indirect costs begin accumulating instantly. First, you have the wages paid to the injured employee for the remainder of that shift, for which zero work was performed.
Makes sense.
But more significantly, you have the wages paid to the 30 other workers in that zone who immediately stopped working. Some rushed to provide first aid, others had to secure the area, and frankly, the rest simply stood there in shock, watching and discussing the traumatic event.
Because you can't just keep working next to a collapsed rack and an injured coworker.
Exactly. You might have an entire wing of a distribution center completely halted for 3 hours while emergency services clear the scene. That is, hundreds of man-hours of wages paid for absolutely zero output.
That's the immediate aftermath. What happens the next morning?
Day 2 introduces the administrative drain. The floor supervisor is no longer managing production or optimizing logistics. They are spending their entire day, and likely the rest of the week, investigating the incident.
Doing the paperwork.
They are interviewing witnesses, filling out internal incident reports, drafting the OSHA 300 log entry, and scrambling to adjust the master staffing schedule to cover the injured workers' shifts.
So their salary is essentially wasted on administrative cleanup.
Right. The supervisor's salary is now a dedicated safety expense, not a production asset. Furthermore, you have the uninsurable physical damage. The insurance might cover the forklift, but they likely won't cover the minor damage to the concrete floor or the specific custom tools the operator dropped and ruined.
And then the waves hit the broader business operations, I assume.
Precisely. By week 2, the downstream effects hit the ledger. Because that specific zone was shut down for investigation and cleanup, orders were delayed. The company misses a critical shipping deadline for a major client.
Oh man, and clients hate that.
That client, furious about the disruption to their own supply chain, cancels their upcoming quarterly contract. You have now lost future guaranteed revenue, all because of a forklift turn.
And you still haven't even replaced the injured worker yet.
That is the month-long wave. The company now has to launch a recruitment campaign. They pay HR to screen candidates, they pay for background checks, and they finally hire a replacement.
And the replacement is going to be slow at first?
Extremely slow. They don't know the systems. You have to assign a senior employee to shadow and train the new hire for 2 weeks, cutting the senior employee's productivity in half.
It just never ends.
And during all of this, the general morale of the workforce has plummeted. People work slower and more cautiously when they feel their environment is dangerous, leading to a silent, insidious drop in overall efficiency across the whole building.
When you lay it out chronologically like that, the earthquake metaphor is absolutely perfect. The ambulance bill is just a tiny fraction of the total economic destruction. Do we have hard data on the ratio? Like, how big are these indirect waves compared to the direct crack in the ground?
We have extensive data, though it varies depending on the specific industry and the methodology of the study. Research indicates that the ratio of indirect to direct costs can range from a low of 1.1 to a staggering high of 20.1.
Wait, a 20-to-1 ratio, meaning for every single dollar the insurance company pays out for the hospital bill, the company is secretly bleeding $20 in lost productivity, supervisor time, and lost clients.
It can absolutely reach that level, particularly in highly specialized manufacturing, where a single disruption halts a massively complex, interconnected assembly line.
That is a terrifying multiplier.
Now, OSHA takes a very specific and somewhat counterintuitive approach to these ratios in their financial models. They suggest an inverse relationship.
Inverse. Meaning what?
They say the lower the direct costs of an accident, the higher the ratio of indirect to direct costs.
Wait, explain that. Why would a cheaper accident have a higher multiplier? That doesn't seem to make sense.
Consider a minor incident. A worker suffers a severe cut that requires a quick trip to the emergency room for stitches, but no overnight stay. The direct medical cost is very low, maybe $1,000.
Okay, a minor hit.
But the factory line still had to shut down for an hour to clean the biohazard. The supervisors still had to spend 4 hours writing a report, and a shipment was still delayed. The indirect costs might easily be $10,000. That is a 10.1 ratio.
Oh, I see. Because the bureaucratic machinery of responding to an accident costs the exact same, regardless of how badly the person is bleeding.
Exactly. The paperwork takes the same amount of time. Conversely, if you have a massive explosion with $2 million in direct medical and property costs, the indirect costs will be massive, yes, but they likely won't be 20 times that amount.
Because it hits a ceiling.
Right. The ratio shrinks as the sheer volume of the direct cost expands. However, for a solid defensible benchmark that safety professionals can use in the boardroom, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, the FMCSA, utilizes a widely accepted average.
What's their number?
They calculate that indirect costs are, on average, 4 times the direct costs, a 4.1 ratio.
A 4-to-1 ratio. That is a fantastic rule of thumb to keep in the back pocket when evaluating a seemingly minor claim.
It's very useful for quick estimates.
And before we run the final C-suite math, there is one more conceptual framework regarding cost that is essential for prioritizing our efforts, especially for the exam. We've talked about the Pareto principle on this show before, the 80-20 rule. How does that apply to lagging indicators and accident costs?
It applies through a concept known as the vital few.
The vital few, okay.
When you analyze a company's historical lagging indicators, you will almost universally find that a very small percentage of the total injuries, the vital few, accounts for the vast majority of all accident costs.
So out of 100 injuries in a calendar year, 80 of them might be minor strains and sprains. They require a little first aid, maybe an ergonomic adjustment at a workstation, but they only consume 20% of your total safety and insurance budget.
Precisely. They are frequent but cheap. But those remaining 20 injuries, the severe catastrophic ones, the complex fractures, the long-term musculoskeletal disorders, the amputations, those vital few cases, will consume 80% or more of your massive financial drain.
Which perfectly circles back to our earlier debate about TCIR versus severity rate.
Now you see the connection.
If a safety manager only looks at the total number of cases, the TCIR, they are treating all 100 injuries as mathematical equals.
Right. A paper cut looks the same as an amputation on the TCIR.
They might spend their entire budget trying to prevent the 80 minor paper cuts because it makes the graph look better to the CEO. But if they focus on the severity rate, they are laser targeting the vital few that are actually capable of bankrupting the firm.
It is the absolute difference between managing statistics and managing actual enterprise risk.
So we have all the pieces on the board now. We know how to track the injuries, normalize them globally, identify the vital few, and we understand that a massive earthquake of indirect costs follows every incident.
We have the whole picture.
How do we take this terrifying reality and communicate it to the chief financial officer? Because let's be honest, a CFO is a highly analytical professional whose primary duty is to protect the company's profit margin.
That is their sole focus.
If a safety director walks into their office talking about DART rates and input-output models, the CFO's eyes are just going to glaze over.
Absolutely. To gain the CFO support, and more importantly, their budget, you have to speak C-suite. You have to translate safety theory entirely into financial application.
And how do we do that?
The most aggressive, undeniable way to do that is by calculating the revenue required to pay for an accident. You don't just present the cost. You calculate the massive amount of new sales the company must generate simply to offset that cost.
Oh, that is a brilliant framing. Let's do this. Let's set up a realistic scenario and walk through the math exactly how a safety manager should present it.
Let's run the boardroom pitch.
Let's go back to our distribution center. A worker has a relatively minor accident. It results in $5,000 of direct medical costs. To a multinational corporation bringing in hundreds of millions in revenue, a $5,000 workers' comp claim sounds like a rounding error.
It's nothing to them.
A CFO might look at that and say, just pay it out of petty cash, let the insurance handle it, and get back to work. Stop bothering me. How do we change their mind?
We walk them through the multiplier effect. First, we establish the true total cost. If we use the specific mathematical model from the source text to demonstrate this calculation, we start with that $5,000 in direct costs.
Okay, $5,000 direct.
The text applies an indirect cost calculation that assigns $6,000 in hidden indirect costs to this specific scenario.
Okay, so $5,000 direct plus $6,000 indirect gives us a total incident cost of $11,000.
Correct. Now, $11,000 still might not sound like a catastrophic threat to a large company. But here is the crucial translation you must make for the C-suite.
Lay it on me.
Companies do not pay for accidental losses out of their gross revenue. Gross revenue is already spoken for. It pays for materials, overhead, and salaries. Losses must be paid entirely out of the company's net profit.
The money left over after everything else is paid.
Exactly. Let's assume this distribution center operates at a fairly standard, healthy 4% net profit margin. They cannot simply pull $11,000 out of a vault.
Because they only keep 4 cents on every dollar they make.
Exactly. To cover that $11,000 pure loss, the company has to generate enough entirely new sales to yield $11,000 in pure profit.
Oh, wow. Okay, what is the formula for that? Because that changes everything.
The formula is simple but devastating. Total cost divided by profit margin. So we take our $11,000 total loss and divide it by 0.04.
Okay, let me do that mental math. 11,000 divided by 0.04. That's $275,000.
Yes. To cover the financial hole created by one relatively minor $5,000 injury, the sales team has to go out into the market and generate $275,000 in additional unbudgeted sales just for the company to break even.
That is staggering.
They have to sell over $250,000 worth of logistics services just to get back to zero.
You're telling the CFO that a single $5,000 mistake on the loading dock completely wiped out the profit from a $250,000 sales campaign.
Yes.
The sales team worked for months to land a $275,000 contract, and the profit from that entire contract was just incinerated by one preventable accident.
The alternative example provided in the text gives another excellent, highly visual perspective on this same concept.
Let's hear it.
Imagine a manufacturing company produces a specific widget. After all materials and labor are accounted for, they make a $15 net profit per widget sold.
Okay, $15 profit per item.
If they suffer a $5,000 injury on the line, and you factor in the indirect costs, bringing the total loss to, say, $15,000, you divide that $15,000 loss by the $15 profit per item.
Okay. 15,000 divided by 15, that means it takes 1,000 widgets sold just to cover the injury.
Exactly. That is 1,000 physical units of production. The raw materials mined, the energy used to run the machines, the labor paid to assemble them, the diesel burned to ship them across the country, all of that effort for 1,000 items was performed entirely for free.
Yielding zero profit for the company.
Simply to pay for a failure in the safety system. When you frame an accident as wiping out the profit of 1,000 physical products, you instantly command the attention of every executive in the room.
I bet. Safety is no longer viewed as a frustrating compliance cost. It is suddenly understood as a critical pillar of profit protection.
That reframes the entire power dynamic of a safety professional. Instead of walking into the boardroom begging for a budget increase as a moral favor, you are offering a strategic partnership to protect their sales margins.
That is so empowering. Now, beyond these profit margin calculations, what other financial metrics are essential for a safety professional to master, particularly for the ASP exam? Because I know insurance plays a huge role.
You must intimately understand the foundational formulas of the insurance industry, specifically the EMR and the loss ratio. Let's start with the EMR, the experience modification rate.
The EMR, I hear this acronym all the time in construction.
It's huge in construction. This is the ultimate lagging indicator utilized by insurance underwriters to drastically adjust a business's workers' compensation premium.
Explain the actuarial logic behind this. Why does insurance use an EMR instead of just looking at what they paid out for you last year and raising your rates by that exact amount? Why pool the risk like that?
Insurance is built on the law of large numbers and predictive modeling. An underwriter isn't just looking at your past, they are trying to predict your future risk. The EMR is a tool of mathematical comparison.
Comparing you to who?
It compares a company's actual claims experience, the real money paid out for your accidents, against the expected claims experience for other companies in your exact same industry classification, of your exact same size.
Ah, so they are grading on a curve.
Yes. Actuaries calculate the statistical baseline for your industry. If you are a commercial roofing contractor, the expected losses are naturally going to be calculated much higher than if you were a clerical accounting firm. An EMR of 1.0 represents the industry average. It means your safety performance is exactly what the actuaries expect.
And if you hit 1.0, you just pay the standard premium.
Exactly. You pay the standard manual premium.
What happens when you deviate from that 1.0 average? Because nobody is exactly average.
If your lagging indicators are poor and your EMR climbs to 1.2, you are performing 20% worse than your peers. Consequently, the insurance company views you as a higher risk, and your premiums will be heavily penalized, often a 20% surcharge added directly to your massive premium bill.
Ouch, that eats right into the profit margin.
But if your EMR drops to 0.55, which is a specific figure referenced in the study materials indicating elite performance, you're experiencing nearly half the expected losses of your competitors.
And they reward you for that.
Yes, the insurance company rewards that reduced risk with drastically lower premiums.
You know, that 0.55 EMR isn't just a badge of honor for the safety department. It is a massive, tangible, competitive advantage for the whole business.
It absolutely is.
Because if my roofing company has a 0.55 EMR and my competitor has a 1.2 EMR, my overhead costs are vastly lower. I can underbid them on every single construction contract and still maintain a higher profit margin simply because my safety program is functioning properly.
Precisely. Safety becomes a weapon in the free market. You win bids because you are safer.
That covers the EMR, the comparison to our peers. What about the loss ratio? How does an underwriter judge our specific relationship with the insurance company?
The loss ratio is an internal evaluation metric for the insurer. It evaluates the direct financial relationship between the actual losses the insurance company had to pay out on your behalf and the premium you paid to them.
So it's basically seeing if you're a profitable customer for them.
Exactly. The specific formula required for the ASP exam is losses divided by the product of the manual premium and the experience modification.
Okay, let me make sure I have that formula exact. It's losses divided by, and then in parentheses, manual premium multiplied by EMOD.
You've got it. Let's run a calculation directly from the text example so the listeners can hear it play out.
Perfect, let's do it.
A company has experienced actual losses of $90,000 this year. Their base manual premium, calculated by their payroll and industry class, is $82,000. And they have a dangerously poor EMOD of 1.4. What is their loss ratio?
Okay, let's solve the denominator first to figure out what they're actually supposed to pay. We take the manual premium of $82,000 and multiply it by their terrible EMOD of 1.4.
Right.
That equals $114,800. Now we take the actual losses, the $90,000, and divide it by that $114,800. When you run that, it gives you 0.7839. So the loss ratio is basically 0.78.
Correct. Understanding how to calculate and interpret these figures allows a safety professional to look at an intimidating insurance renewal document and instantly diagnose the financial health of the safety program.
You can literally read the tea leaves of the company's financial future.
You can identify exactly where the program is bleeding cash and use those figures to justify the budget for new leading indicators, new training, new equipment to stop the bleeding.
It transforms the safety manager from a compliance cop into a financial strategist. But I have to ask, if someone is managing a real facility and wants to run these complex direct to indirect ratios and profit margin calculations for their own specific industry, do they have to sit there doing long division on a napkin for every single accident? Is there a tool that automates this translation?
Thankfully, yes. You don't have to do it all by hand. One of the most powerful resources available is OSHA's Safety Pays e-tool.
Safety Pays, okay.
It is a free, publicly available software specifically designed to help companies calculate the true cost of accidents. You input your company's actual profit margins, you select the specific types of injuries you're experiencing from a drop-down menu, and the software utilizes the accepted indirect cost multipliers to calculate the exact impact on your bottom line.
That is amazing.
It instantly generates the total sales required to offset that specific injury. It is a phenomenal tool for generating indisputable data-driven reports for the C-suite.
That is exactly what you need when you walk into the boardroom. You don't bring an emotional plea. You bring the Safety Pays printout showing a $500,000 sales deficit.
Let the numbers do the talking.
This has been an incredibly deep, sometimes terrifying, but ultimately empowering exploration of the mechanics of safety. Let's trace the path we've taken today.
We covered a lot of ground.
We did. We started by recognizing that a glowing green safety dashboard can be a fatal misdiagnosis if you don't understand the underlying metrics. We explored the necessity of the input-output model, proving that the headlights of our leading indicators are useless if we aren't rigorously tracking the devastating bumps in the rearview mirror of our lagging indicators.
Right, the reality check.
Then we demystify the OSHA 200,000 formulas, the TCIR, the DART, and the severity rate, uncovering the critical reality that severity tells the true story of operational damage, separating the minor scrapes from the catastrophic failures.
We navigated the international dilemma, too.
Yes. We navigated the treacherous waters of international data, realizing that a 3-day reporting rule in the EU and a 7-day rule in Japan will completely corrupt a global dashboard unless a safety director enforces strict, normalized corporate standards.
You have to own your data.
We abandoned the static iceberg metaphor and embraced the earthquake model, charting the massive, destructive seismic waves of indirect costs that ripple through a company's productivity, morale, and supply chain long after the ambulance has driven away.
The 4-to-1 ratio.
And finally, we learned how to speak the language of the C-suite. We learned how to use EMRs, loss ratios, and profit margin multipliers to prove that a $5,000 medical bill is actually a $250,000 threat to the company's survival.
It represents a profound evolution in the role of the safety professional. It is the necessary shift from a purely compliance-driven mindset to a proactive value creation mindset. And to that end, I want to leave you with a final conceptual challenge to mull over as you prepare for your exam or return to your facility.
Lay it on us.
We have spent our entire time today aggressively analyzing how to measure the financial devastation of an accident that did happen. We calculated the damage in the rearview mirror. But consider the inverse. If the true cascading cost of an incident is an invisible earthquake that destroys profit margins, how do you calculate the exact financial value of the accident that your safety program successfully prevented today?
Wow.
How do you prove to a CFO that your safety interventions saved them from $1 million sales deficit this quarter? When you can figure out how to put a hard, defensible dollar amount on the absolute absence of a disaster, you transcend the role of a safety manager. You become the most valuable, irreplaceable strategist in the boardroom.
The measurable value of nothing happening. Because when you design the system perfectly, when the leading indicators are dialed in, the earthquake never triggers. No X-ray needed. Thank you so much for joining us for this incredibly detailed look into the sources on this edition of QHSE Talks. We wish you the absolute best of luck on your ASP exam preparations and even more clarity and success in your daily mission to protect both your workforce and your organization's future. Keep those headlights on, keep checking the rearview mirror, and we will see you next time.